and that these claims are often contradictory. A lot of people think that what are the origins? Many people, especially Jews living in the Western world, they believe that the origins of anti-Semitism, a lot of Jews at least, think it's tied to the church, the ancient church. But because the Jews are the Christ killer and all that jazz, it's been centuries, people think that that might be the origins of Jew hatred. But the truth is, as we're going to see right now, the hatred of Jews predates Christianity by centuries, close to millennia. We're going to read two texts right now. The first we're going to read is from Tacitus. Tacitus was a Roman senator and one of the most important Roman historians. He lived in the 1st century, and he writes a history of Rome. And over the course of his writing the history of Rome, he mentions the Roman conquest of Jerusalem. And once he starts discussing Jerusalem, he gives us a little bit about the history of the Jews. And the next text we're going to read was written by a man by the name of Josephus. You've been here before, you've heard about Josephus. Josephus was a Jew who witnessed the destruction of this temple, the Second Holy Temple in Jerusalem. During the 2nd century, he was a Jew. He was actually one of the priests. He was a Kohen. Initially, he fought with the Jews in the revolt against the Romans, but eventually he saw the futility of the revolt. He felt it was folly and was dangerous, and he ended up flipping to the Roman side, became a Roman citizen and a historian who wrote Jewish history for the Romans. And one of his more famous books is a book called Against Apion. Apion was an Egyptian philosopher, a Hellenized Egyptian philosopher, who lived also in the 1st century, and he wrote claims against the Jews. And we're going to see, we don't actually have the books of Apion, but based on what we read in the books of Josephus, we can see the claims that Apion made. Now, one thing I'd like you, while we read these next two texts, is as you read, underline, whether with a pen or just in your mind, to hold note of the phrases, the ideas that feed into anti-Semitic tropes and prejudices till today. There's going to be things that we're going to read about in the next two texts that still really are part of the anti-Semitic tropes that people still think about today. So first on page 48, text 1, I'm going to read the next two texts. Let's go. Once during a plague in Egypt, this is from Tacitus, again, a Roman historian. Once during a plague in Egypt, which caused bodily disfigurement, King Bacchus, I'm just going to guess that's how you pronounce it, approached the oracle of Ammon and asked for a remedy, whereupon he was told to purge his kingdom and to transport his race into other lands, since it was hateful to the gods. So the Hebrews were searched out and gathered together, then being abandoned in the desert, while all others lay idle and weeping, one only of the exiles, Moses by name, warned them not to hope for help from gods or men, for they were deserted by both, but to trust to themselves. 1 second, somebody's trying to enter. Let me just let them in before we continue. The Jews regard as profane all that we hold sacred. On the other hand, they permit all that we abhor. They first chose to rest on the 7th day, but after a time, they were led by the charms of indolence to give over the 7th year as well to inactivity. Here they're actually referencing both Shabbos and the sabbatical year. Parenthetically, this year is a sabbatical year, just good to know. The other customs of the Jews are base and abominable, and owe their persistence to their depravity. For the worst rascals among other people, renouncing their ancestral religions, always kept sending tribute and contributions to Jerusalem, thereby increasing the wealth of the Jews. Again, the Jews are extremely loyal toward one another and always ready to show compassion, but toward every other people, they feel only hate and enmity. Shalom, do you mind reading Josephus on page 50?
They tell lies and invent absurd calumnies about our temple, without showing any consciousness of piety. Yet to high-minded men, nothing is more disgraceful than lie of any description. But above all, on the subject of a temple of worldwide fame and commanding sanctity. Within the sanctuary, Apion was the appropriate to assert that the Jews kept an ass's head, worshipping that animal and deeming it worthy of the deepest reverence. The fact was disclosed, he maintained, on the occasion of the spoliation of the temple by Antiochus Epiphanes, when the head made of gold and worth a high price was discovered. Now, how did he escape them if the facts convict him of telling an incredible lie? He adds a second story regarding, which is a malicious slander upon us from beginning to end. In their anxiety to defend Antiochus, they have further invented to discredit us the fictitious story which follows. Apion, who is there, the spokesman of the others, asserts that, quote, Antiochus found in the temple a couch on which a man was reclining. The king's entry was instantly hailed by him with adoration, as the doctor procured his profound relief. Falling at the king's knees, he stretched out his right hand and implored him to set him free. He said that he was a Greek god and that while traveling about the province for his livelihood, he was suddenly kidnapped by men of a foreign race and conveyed to the temple. There he was shut up and seen by nobody, but was fattened on feasts of the most lavish description. At first, these unlooked for attentions deceived him and caused him pleasure. Suspicion followed, then consternation. Finally, on consulting the attendants who waited upon him, he heard of the unutterable law of the Jews, for the sake of which he was being fed. The practice was repeatedly annually at a fixed season. They would kidnap a Greek foreigner, fatten him up for a year, and then lead him to a certain wood where they slew him, sacrificed his body with customary ritual, partook of his flesh, and while immolating the Greek, swore an oath of enmity to the Greeks. The remains of the victims were then thrown into a pit. The man stated that he had now but a few days left to live and implored the king, out of respect for the gods of Greece, to defeat this Jewish product upon his lifeblood and to deliver him from his miserable predicament. Fools must be refuted not by arguments, but by facts. Here then we have rank entirety of its worth and a gratuitous lie designed to mislead persons who do not trouble to investigate the facts.
So now, what are some of the anti-Semitic motifs and tropes that even today still apply? Everyone at home, you could also jump in. Shalom, why don't you take us?
All right, can I do three? And then
Give as many as you like.
All right, causing disease, 1, inclined to behave with depravity, 2, lazy, 3. Okay.
So the Jews being lazy, that's something that's been that people still say today. The Shabbos, again, the Shemitah year, the Jubilee year, the Jews spread disease. There was actually articles going around, many articles going around about how the Jews started even this pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So these are things that still happen till today. The AIDS epidemic, exactly, that liberal Jews brought it into the country, right? Jimmy, you said you wanted to mention something?
Worshipping the animal, which was worshipping money.
The gold head, exactly, that they promote.
And second, the blood libel, which is super interesting with the Hansel and Gretel, where they fattened the Greek up.
Right. So most of us, the truth is, I always thought that the blood libel was invented in Europe. The first European blood libel was in Norwich, in England, in the 11th century.
Yes.
Where they claimed that the Jews of Norwich killed a Christian child and used his blood for the matzahs. And I always thought it started there. And we have evidence that they were saying this 1,000 years prior.
Well, no, that was the flesh, that's the flesh libel.
Oh,
This one
was specifically blood.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the English was the blood libel.
right.
Okay.
But the idea of that we kill other people of other faiths and for ritual slaughter, that's something that's predates the blood libel by over 1,000 years.
Did you right say only loyal to each other?
Only loyal to each other. That's a big one. That Jews have dual loyalty, mostly to other countries, to their faith.
And perform evil rituals of hatred toward other people.
Susie, you're muted. Susie, you got to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you make Emmy and Jimmy louder, speak louder?
They just speak up when you talk.
Want to hear your lovely voices.
I guess the microphone's not picking them up.
Loud, Susie.
Good, I'm glad, because I didn't hear you very well, or Emmy's.
Okay.
So let's just go through a few more of them. Let's say Tacitus blames the biggest societal problem facing the Egyptians, which was then a plague, on the Jews. This is eerily similar to the slogan, the tagline of the Nazi propaganda paper, Der Stürmer. The Stürmer, the paper that they produced every day, their tagline was, "The Jews are our misfortune." They actually say a joke. I'm sorry, again, I'm going to say another one of these jokes. There's two Jews sitting on a park bench. One of them is reading Der Stürmer, and the other one's reading Der Vorwärts, which is a Jewish paper in Yiddish. So the one reading the Vorwärts, the Jewish paper, goes to his friend, "You lunatic, what are you reading the Nazi propaganda for?" He says, "Well, in all the Jewish papers, all I read about is the tzaras." Right? What are tzaras? Tzaras are the trials, the tribulations, the problems that we're facing. When I read the Nazi papers, it says, "Oh, the Jews are running the media, they're running the banks, they're running the government. It's great. Yeah. Why would I read our newspapers? Let's read their newspapers." But this idea of blaming the biggest societal problem on the Jews dates back 2,000 years. This was written in the 1st century, Tacitus, using sources that are 300-400 years old. And this well predates the advent of the church. Definitely the way the church being established as a major religion.
Can I say something
Sure.
very quickly? Susie, can you hear me?
Yeah, she hears you, but just speak up a little bit.
I just want to say something. This book, this chapter has all the different types of tropes.
Mm-hmm.
But I read Bernard Lewis,
Mm-hmm.
and he had it very clear that
Sorry,
with
excuse
the
me.
passage of time, anti-Semitism took its place in whatever was going on that period. Paganism, we were the other. They were doing orgies, doing human sacrifices. We were doing these ethics, and so we were different because we followed codes of ritual that were based in ethics.
Yep.
We were different, and they didn't like that. They were doing orgies,
Right.
so they didn't like that. We didn't. Then the Jesus thing was deicide,
Right.
killing Jesus.
Christ killer.
Yeah. Then after diaspora, we were Christ. Then the diaspora made us nation within a nation.
Right.
We were not loyal to the
Either
home.
we're the parasite or we're really running everything behind the scenes.
Right.
That's actually going to be the next point we're going to make.
Which was, and the other one after that was impurity of blood, which came from the blood libel that you're talking about, which Hitler then took to make it that we were impure.
They use the race science.
And then, of course, the fifth is the imperialists because Israel.
Right.
Because of Israel. But I've added a sixth, wokeism. Now the Jew is the whitest of the white, and therefore the most oppressive.
Right.
Do you
Yeah,
understand?
yeah, for sure. So there's going to be a point we're going to make in a little bit that anti-Semitism is basically very similar to conspiracy theory. You cannot disprove the conspiracy theory. Why? Because any evidence you're going to use to disprove a conspiracy theory just becomes part of the conspiracy, right? Let's say the moon landing, right? There are people that think the moon landing never happened.
Yeah.
No matter what evidence you show them, they'll just say that's part of your conspiracy.
Yeah.
So it's Deborah Lipstadt, which we're going to read the text from her in a couple of minutes. She said that it has a self-sealing quality. That no matter how many leaks you puncture into the idea of anti-Semitism or a conspiracy theory, it just seals itself because it just morphs itself and it's just nebulous. It's just this idea that's staying around despite any logic. And hopefully by the end of the class, we'll try to explain why that is. But we see that anti-Semitism was always absurd. And we're going to watch a video. The point of the video is only one text, one quote from this gentleman. But I think the video is worth watching. We're going to watch a video about a man by the name of Menachem Zemba. He lived through the Holocaust, was actually killed in the Warsaw Uprising, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And he was a fascinating man. To tell you the truth, when we were in yeshiva, we used to learn his writings on the Talmud, particularly the Tractate of Shabbat. And he was one of my favorite writers. He wrote tens of thousands of pages. Very, very few of it made it to us because most of it was destroyed in the ghetto. But he has a very important quote, which we're going to hear somebody read. But the reason I want to watch this video is because I think his life is worth just learning about for all of us. So everyone, I'm going to share the screen and we're going to watch this video together. Let me just, okay. Let's go back here and get it going. Okay, I'll catch up a little bit. Right, the idea is ancient. These anti-Semitic tropes of all societal problems being blamed on the Jews are lazy, rejected by the gods. That's another thing that all the other major religions believe now, opposing values to the main society. The idea that all Jews are wealthy, that they look to rip off the non-Jews, they hate non-Jews, and cruel rituals. Yeah. Oh, one thing that we should have mentioned, the idea of absurdity that still lives today, is the idea that immediately after the 9/11 attacks, Al-Qaeda took responsibility, I think, almost immediately. 2 days later, somebody from the Information Times, a website, a blog, wrote how you can't rule out the Mossad as being the ones to plan this whole idea, the terrorist government of Israel. And they said, and then a Libyan newspaper picked up on this idea and said that the Mossad warned 4,000 Jews not to show up to work. I mean, to go and show these people that 12% of all those who were killed in the Twin Towers were Jews, but that doesn't matter. Again, the facts really don't matter to these people. It's inherently absurd, so trying to explain the facts isn't really going to help.
I like that.
On the east bank of the Vistula River, in the Warsaw suburb of Praga, a Jewish boy was born in 1883 and named Menachem, he who brings comfort. His father, Elazar Zemba, died shortly after, and the boy was raised by his grandfather. He became rapidly known as a dazzling genius and formidable Torah scholar, corresponding with the best Torah minds of his era. Menachem Zemba married at age 18. His wealthy father-in-law supported him for 20 years while he studied and put pen to paper, authoring over 10,000 pages of original Torah insights. including commentaries on Maimonides' magnum opus and on the Jerusalem Talmud, and 4 volumes of halachic responsa. His fame spread globally. He was offered rabbinical positions, including the office of the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, but he humbly shunned leadership. Leadership was thrust upon him in 1935 by order of the Grand Rabbi of Ger. The humble rabbi joined the Warsaw Rabbinate and proved his worth, becoming a world authority on Jewish law and a foremost spokesman for Polish Jewry. Before reaching age 40, Rabbi Zemba was appointed honorary secretary to Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah, the Council of Great Torah Sages, populated by sages twice his age. In 1937, he twice addressed the full assemblage and was treated with awe. Then the Nazis arrived. Jewish Warsaw was reduced to a ghetto. 460,000 people were imprisoned in just 1.3 square miles. Starvation, disease, deportation, murder. Despite repeated offers of escape, Rabbi Zemba refused to abandon his flock. To them, he was a rare pillar of comfort. As one of a handful of rabbis who survived in the ghetto until its final days, he rallied his desperate brethren with powerful messages of hope and determination. He recorded an insight into the nature of anti-Semitism before the war. In light of his subsequent experiences under Nazi depravity, his words ring with timeless poignancy. There are those who seek to identify legitimate causes for the hatred of Jews. However, reality has shown that there is no legitimate reason. Anti-Semitism has no justifiable cause. The haters simply choose to hate God's people. This is demonstrated by the fact that Jews are hated for being capitalists and also for being socialists. They are hated because they are overly ambitious and sharp-minded, and also because they are indolent and parasitic. They are hated because they are too religious and conservative, and also because they advance progressive and secular ideas. The reasons for this hatred are consistently contradictory and have not an ounce of logic behind them. Shortly before Passover, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising erupted. Amid furious fighting and flames, Rabbi Zemba calmly conducted a Passover Seder as if nothing was amiss. But on the 5th day of Passover, April 24, 1943, Rabbi Zemba was gunned down by Nazi bullets. The community he shepherded with love and sacrifice came together at terrible risk to bury their beloved rabbi in a temporary grave. His family was deported to Treblinka. None survived. His lifetime of copious writings rose to heaven in the Warsaw fires. Hardly any of it survived. In 1958, his body was exhumed. Tens of thousands of people amassed, including an array of leading Jewish sages, to lay the heroic rabbi to eternal rest in dignity. Reality has proven that this righteous man was right. There is no legitimate reason for the hatred leveled in each generation against the innocent men, women, and children of the Jewish people.
How do you spell his last name? How do you spell his name? Zeta?
It's Zemba. I would spell it Ziemba, probably.
Oh, Z-I-E.
We don't really have a letter for J.
Oh, here it is.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
So Menachem Zemba.
Yeah.
So his point was basically what M. Shalom was saying. Everyone just blames the Jews for whatever they want it to be. In the 20th century, the early 20th century, Jews were hated by the communists as fascists. They were hated by the fascists as communists. They were hated by the communists as capitalists. They were hated by the capitalists as communists. None of it makes any sense. They're hated for being too weak, but they're also hated for being too powerful, right?
Very arbitrary.
If you look in Nazi propaganda, which I don't think we need to belabor this point, they always portray the Jew as weak and sniveling, but at the same time controlling everything. and domineering and controlling the entire globe, which doesn't make sense. It's oxymoronic. But the point is that anti-Semitism never did and never will make sense. But again, this idea of it having a self-sealing quality, basically like a conspiracy theory, is very true, I think. Here in this land of the free, home of the brave that we live in today, a lot of Americans believe in lots of different sorts of conspiracy theories. If you've ever tried to speak to anybody who has these conspiracy theories, which I have in the past, there is no way to talk to them. There really isn't. And you're wasting your time because you could bring facts, but your facts are just you distorting the facts to perpetuate the conspiracy, right? That's what they say. So if you say the sun is rising in the west and setting in the east, and you try to prove it, and you try to tell them the opposite, nothing you're going to show them is going to help. Correct? So that's what we mean by the self-sealing quality, which is something that's definitely true of the idea of anti-Semitism. But before we go on, this is something we probably should have addressed earlier in the course, but I think it's worth mentioning now, especially when we're talking about the actual idea of anti-Semitism as a concept. The very word anti-Semitism itself really is a bit of a misnomer. We shouldn't be using that term. The terminology anti-Semitism, which we're going to read the text 6, which talks about the origins of the word anti-Semitism, was created by people living in the 19th century because they wanted a terminology to call Jew hatred in a more respectable manner. There were lots of new isms, right? There were lots of new isms in the 19th century. Everybody believed in an ism, meaning a school of thought. But so now if I represent my ancient Jew hatred as an ism, as a well-structured, polite, now I have a polite term. Instead of calling it Jew hatred, I'll call it anti-Semitism because it isn't. Let's read what I mean by this in text 6. This is from the Dictionary of Anti-Semitism. I'm going to be doing the reading from now on so the people on the Zoom call can hear it better. Mar Wilhelm, who lived, Mar Wilhelm, this is the dictionary for anti-Semitism. He was a German writer, political theorist, and agitator, which is quite the little biography for him. In 1879, Mar founded the Anti-Semites League, the first organization devoted exclusively to promoting political anti-Semitism. Mar's organization reflected his secular racism, which existed inconsistently alongside his religious anti-Semitism. His self-proclaimed goal was to free Christianity from the yoke of Judaism. Mar coined the term anti-Semitism, which for him denoted a secular racial hatred of Jews. He used the word anti-Semitism to make Jew hatred seem rational, sanctioned by science, polite. Just another ism. There's capitalism, there's communism, there's socialism. There's another ism that has a place that people could come and discuss a polite society. So we come up with the term anti-Semitism. So really, we shouldn't be using that terminology. Really, we should call it Jew hatred, which is what the Jews always called it in ancient times. There's a text here from Glockel of Hameln. Glockel of Hameln is a book that everyone, if you have the time, should actually try to get from the library and read it. It's the oldest autobiography we have of a Jewish woman. She was a Jewish woman who lived in Germany in the 17th century. And she wrote a great memoir. I have the Hebrew edition at home. It's called Zichronot, which means the memoirs. But it's a worthwhile read, basically describing a very good insight into Jewish life, everyday Jewish life in pre-industrial age Europe.
Can you spell the book?
I don't know how, the English.
Well, just phonetically.
Glockel, which would be Glucel, of Hameln, which would be Hameln. There are different English translations. It was written originally in Yiddish.
Hamell?
Hameln. Hameln. Zichronot is the Hebrew version. It was written originally in Yiddish, and here we have an excerpt from the Hebrew edition, translated obviously into English. She describes a situation that happened in Hamburg. There was a non-Jewish resident in Hamburg who was killed. The authorities started blaming the Jews, and the way they actually ended up finding out the whole discovery is a whole crazy, whacked out story. It's a good screenplay that somebody should probably write one day, but that's not really what we're going to focus on. But she says, on the day of the murderer was sentenced to death, there was a commotion in Hamburg that had not been seen there for 100 years over any man sentenced to death. The lives of all Jews were endangered due to the extreme rishus, which means evil or wickedness that had been roused. Jews for centuries referred to anti-Semitism as rishus, which just means cruelty or wickedness, because that is what it is. It's not an ism. An ism kind of really lends it some credence. You know, they're putting a veneer of civility on this idea that now it's an idea. It's not just a hatred, it's an idea. And any idea has credence, right? There's the marketplace of ideas. So you can't reject my idea out of hand, you have to listen to me.
And there's degrees of anti-Semitism.
That's the
There's no
idea-
degree of
right.
wickedness.
That's the idea behind the terminology anti-Semitism. We're using the term anti-Semitism in this course because that's what we all call it, and it's just easier that way.
Another thing is anti-Semitism becomes a rubric. And in other words, it's on an outline, it would be Roman numeral 1. And so then you can put A, B, C.
Yeah.
By becoming a rubric, you can then list all the arguments for that
Right.
title. So what you're opening up is a whole new category. You know, it's not just giving it a name and codifying it. It's allowing to add all sorts of nuances to it.
Now there's room for discussion,
Yes.
right? We're allowing room for discussion.
Yeah.
So really the term is not a term we should be using, but as part of the nomenclature, what are we going to do, right? It's
Yeah.
the lexicon.
Right.
But that's just something that we should remember, that really we should call it by what it is, call a spade a spade. It is not an ism, it's just hatred, it's wickedness.
Mhm.
Okay, so now that we discussed that anti-Semitism is absurd, that it should not exist. So why does it exist? And there are many different explanations that are given. And we're going to read one quick text from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. I've mentioned him a lot of times. I'm a big fan of his personally. It's going to be his yahrzeit soon, actually. But he wrote extensively about anti-Semitism. And this next text, which we're going to read on page 60, he runs through many of the different explanations for the persistence of anti-Semitism that have been offered. Some of them might resonate with you, some of them might not, but I'm going to want to focus on one in particular after we're finished, okay? Text 8 again on page 60. There has been an almost endless set of speculations about what the cause of anti-Semitism actually is. Some have seen it in psychological terms: displaced fear, externalization of inner conflict, projected guilt, the creation of a scapegoat. Others have given it a socio-political explanation. Jews were a group who could conveniently be blamed for economic resentment, social unrest, class conflict, or destabilizing change. Yet others view it through the prism of culture and identity. Jews were the stereotyped outsiders against whom a group could define itself. Yet others, noting the concentration of anti-Semitism amongst the very faiths, Christianity and Islam, that trace their descent to Abraham and Judaism, favor a Freudian explanation in terms of the myth of Oedipus. We seek to kill those who gave us birth. It would be strange indeed if so complex a phenomenon did not give rise to multiple explanations. So some of these explanations might resonate with you, some of them might not. I think they all have a grain of validity to them, but I want to focus, being that in the context of this course, we're trying to say what the Torah approach to anti-Semitism is. So we're going to turn to a Torah source for the idea of the roots and origin, so to speak, of anti-Semitism. We're going to go back to the story of Esther. We mentioned the story of Esther last week. We're going to mention it next week and the week after. And the reason for that is because it's the classic story of anti-Semitism in the Jewish Bible, in the Tanakh. So now, just to give a little context for those of us who need a refresher, the story of Esther takes place in the 70-year period between the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem and the rebuilding of the second temple. And all the Jews were living in the Persian Empire. The man who was on the throne at that time was a man by the name of Ahasuerus. And this Ahasuerus had an advisor, a hotshot advisor, who rose to be the second in command of the entire empire, by the name of Haman. And Haman hated the Jews. So the book of Esther lays out how Haman after he decided that he wants to annihilate all the Jews in the empire, how he went about getting the king Ahasuerus' approval. And he approaches King Ahasuerus, and he brings to attention that Yesh Noyam Echad, there's a certain people that are scattered and separate amongst your kingdom, throughout all the provinces of your kingdom, and he asks permission of the king to destroy the Jews. And he offers him a ludicrous amount of money, 10,000 silver talents, which literally would need a dump truck to transport. It was a massive amount of money. The way I understand that the reason why he was offering him money is because you might hate the Jews, but they're a good form of tax revenue, right? So if we're going to destroy the Jews, we got to pay off the king, at least for that. What's King Ahasuerus' response? Anybody remember? How does Ahasuerus respond when Haman offers him the money to destroy the Jews? Anyone?
Well, I perform spiels and I don't remember this story.
So he says, kill the Jews, go ahead, and keep the money.
Mhm.
Kill the Jews, keep the money. You don't need to convince me. You don't need to give the money to the treasury. Save the money. and do whatever you want to do with the Jews. So now the Talmud gives an analogy about the psyches of Haman and Achashverosh in this scene. Again, Haman offering the money to kill the Jews, and Achashverosh saying, don't worry about it, keep the money, do whatever you want with the Jews. So now let's read the text 9, which is from the Talmud, tractate Megillah, which spends, as you would imagine, most of its time discussing the story of Esther and the laws of Purim. On page 61, we can use a parable to gain insight into the respective positions of Achashverosh and Haman. They're similar to two individuals, one of whom has a tall mound in his field, whereas the other has a ditch in his field. The owner of the ditch mused to himself, I wish I could buy the tall mound to fill up my ditch. The owner of the mound said to himself, I wish I could purchase the right to dump my mound into this empty ditch. Not long afterwards, the two met. The owner of the ditch said, sell me your mound. The owner of the mound says, take it for free, you'll do me a favor. So basically the parable is, to paraphrase the parable, there's two guys, you have Haman, it's like somebody who has a ditch, he has a big hole in his ground, in his land, and it's a problem. I need to go buy dirt to fill up the ground, the hole in the ground. Achashverosh is like a person who has a bunch of dirt that he's looking to get rid of. And then Haman, so to speak, comes to Achashverosh, says, can I buy your dirt off you? And Achashverosh says, do me a favor, take it for free. You're solving me a problem, just do me a favor, take it for free. So now, what's the point of an analogy in general? What's the point of an analogy? Of a metaphor? What's the point of a metaphor?
The metaphor is so we can see it more clearly.
Convey something that we wouldn't be able to understand at face value, right? So now, what's not understood in this exchange between Haman and Achashverosh that we have to come up with this parable for? It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Haman says, I don't like the Jews, I want to kill them. Here's some money. Achashverosh says, you know what, I also don't like them, kill them anyways.
Yeah.
It's very straightforward. What's the point of the metaphor? What's the point of an analogy?
Wait, what's the point of the ditch?
Right, what's the point of the
I
story?
didn't get it.
And even focusing on the ditch, really, both of them had mounds. Both of them had something they were looking to get rid of, right?
Yeah.
What was Haman looking to fill in? The whole analogy of a ditch doesn't really seem to apply. So the Rebbe asks these questions about this Gemara, this Talmud, and the analogy of the Talmud, and actually says that's the whole point. The Talmud is trying to tell us something that we would not be able to understand at face value. The Talmud is basically telling us that there are two dimensions to anti-Semitism. One dimension of anti-Semitism is a very superficial level, like Achashverosh. Talmud actually says that Achashverosh was a melech tipish. He was a foolish king. He was not a very deep man. He was superficial. Everything was very surface level with Achashverosh. So why didn't Achashverosh like the Jews? They were different, right? It bugs him. He's an imperialist, right? He's an empire. Everyone should be the same. We're Persians. Everyone has to be Persian. Here you have guys that are eating gefilte fish. They're wearing weird furry hats, and they're keeping Shabbos. The ladies, they have dressed a certain way. Stresses me out. Get rid of them, right? It's very superficial. Get rid of this mound of dirt. Just remove them. Just get them out of here. I don't want them here.
Okay.
Then you have, I'm sorry? Then you have Haman. Haman, while he was also an anti-Semite, was a bit of a deeper person. He had a ditch. What do you mean by a ditch? Haman, one of the most pathetic things actually, when you read the Megillah, when you read the Purim story, there's one time in the entire Purim story where you actually feel bad for Haman. As a kid, you feel bad for Haman. When does this happen? After he and Achashverosh, for those of you who know the Purim story, he's invited by Achashverosh, by Queen Esther, for a meal exclusively with him and Achashverosh. So now at this point, Haman is literally on the top of the world. And I mean this literally. He was the second most powerful man on the planet. He had many, many children. The Talmud says he had 70 children from multiple wives. He was fabulously wealthy. He had his plan to exterminate the Jews was going on. It was happening. The gears were turning. He was at the pinnacle of his political career to the point that out of all the people in the kingdom that sit down with the king and the queen, who's sitting down? Haman. Then what happens? He walks out of his house. He walks out of the king's palace. And who does he see? Mordechai. He sees one Jew. And this Jew's very existence drives him up the wall. And he goes home to his wife and his kids. The Talmud actually says, not the Talmud, the Esther, the book of Esther says, let's read together text 10. Haman told them, meaning his friends and his family, text 10 on page 63. Haman told them about his magnificent wealth and his many sons, and how the king had promoted him and advanced him above the other officials and royal courtiers, people, courtiers. What is more, said Haman, Queen Esther personally prepared a feast, and besides the king, she did not invite anyone but me. And tomorrow, not only today I sat down with the king and queen for a feast, but tomorrow too I am invited by her along with the king. But all this means nothing to me each time I see Mordechai the Jew sitting at the palace gate. Again, Haman was the most powerful man in the entire kingdom. And every person on Achashverosh's, according to Achashverosh's orders, had to bow down to him. There's one person who didn't, Mordechai. One Jew who didn't. And Mordechai's bowing down, that refusal to bow down, to Haman, didn't just make him angry. It made everything else worthless. Think about it. It's actually very, very sad. He has everything that you can possibly desire in this world.
You feel sorry for him now like that?
It's innocent. No, it's sad. You know, it's pathetic.
Pathetic.
It's
yeah.
pathetic. It's pathetic.
Yeah.
That's a better term.
Mhm.
So what's happening here? Why is he so dissatisfied? He sees one Jew who refuses to bow down to him, and it's all worthless. When Haman confronted Mordechai, what happened? He was reminded that this person, this Mordechai, was a member of a nation that embraced purpose. One of the fundamental ideas in Judaism is that God created every single human being with a purpose. If that person did not have a purpose, they wouldn't exist. So fundamental idea is that every person, Jew and non-Jew, have a purpose to fulfill in this world. And because God created us to fulfill a purpose, so part of the human psyche is that we have a need for a purpose. We have a drive for a purpose. And if somebody lives a life without purpose, then they have a purpose-filled hole in their life, within their soul, within their heart. It's a very basic human need to have a desire for purpose. So Haman has everything he needs, everything he could possibly want, but he was living a life without purpose. But now he sees Mordechai, a man who dedicates his entire life to purpose. That reminds him of the yawning emptiness within his heart, within his soul. That's his ditch. His ditch is his lack of purpose, his lack of meaning. And Mordechai, all Mordechai did was remind him of his lack of meaning. Here's a person. He's a Jew, and he lives the way a Jew is supposed to live, which is a life of purpose. That's what being a Jew is, right? Living a life full of purpose. And that reminded him of the metaphorical gaping hole within his heart. And this is what caused Haman to resent the Jews, particularly Mordechai, so much. In order to feel happy and content, he needed to fill that hole, right? Human beings, I mean, we could talk about this ad nauseum, but look at the most powerful, wealthiest people in this country. Most of them are deeply, deeply unhappy, right? Why? Because they have no purpose. Look, you could look to Hollywood, look at the sports figures, look at billionaires like Jeff Bezos, right? I don't think anybody would argue they're happy, right? Even though they have everything in the world. Why? Because they're lacking purpose. And you have a hole inside your heart that you need to fill when you're missing purpose. So everyone's chasing purpose. So Haman was hoping. Haman had two ways of going about this, right? Either live a life of purpose or get rid of that which is stressing me out, the trigger I have, which is that Jew who's reminding me of my lack of purpose, who's reminding me of that gaping hole within my heart. He took the easy way out, not to deal with his own issues and go to a therapist, sit on a couch and try to figure out what's actually bothering him. Just get rid of that thing that's triggering that issue. He was hoping that if I kill the Jews, exterminate the Jews, I'm going to exterminate those witnesses to purpose. It's actually what the prophet says about the Jews, that atem edai. We are witnesses to God. Why? Because we live a life of purpose. We show the rest of the world that purpose is the reason for creation. He could have embraced that message of divine inspiration, choose to live a life according to a mission of purpose, but he didn't. He couldn't. He went the opposite route, which was what? To overcome his void by removing the physical presence of the Jews. So now we understand why the Talmud is trying to tell us this metaphor. Because it's saying there's something a little bit deeper behind Haman's anti-Semitism. He wasn't just stressed out because the Jews were different, because they wear yarmulkes and because they light Shabbos candles and because they are a little bit different. What stressed him out, what bothered him was that the Jews reminded him of his lack of purpose. So he had this ditch. He did have a ditch. There was something missing in his life. And he hoped to fill it in with Achashverosh's dirt. By exterminating all the Jews, that's what he was hoping. So this is another explanation for the persistence of anti-Semitism. And the reason why I think it's so important to talk about this one is because where is this explanation for anti-Semitism oriented? Which way is it facing? Who has the blame for anti-Semitism?
The hater.
The hater,
Yeah.
right? A major problem in Judaism, particularly the past 250 years, is that we internalized anti-Semitism, correct?
Yes, definitely.
Because there's actually a great quote. We're going to read from our Jonathan Sachs again. A great quote that he says that if you're hated, it's natural to believe that you are hateful. The response of many Jews, particularly starting in the 19th and 20th centuries, in response to centuries of anti-Semitism was, you know what, maybe we should change something. There's a problem with us. And why is that so dangerous? Why is that so harmful? Imagine you have a child or a grandchild who's in school, who's being bullied, right? So you're not gonna, what happens if the kid starts thinking, you know what, maybe if I avoid going to the playground during recess, I won't get bullied. Maybe if I don't go to lunch or don't walk down this hallway, the bully won't be able to see me and I won't be bullied. I don't think anybody would give that advice to their child or their grandchild, right?
Right.
We call it in modern vernacular, we call it victim blaming, right? It's not the bully, the one who's being bullied's fault. It's the bully's fault. We have to figure out, why is he bullying? And usually it's kind of like the anti-Semites, because there's a hole within their life that they're trying to fill. And they have misplaced anger, whatever it is that they're directing, instead of directing it inwards and trying to deal with it, they're directing it outwards. Let's read text 11, which from Jonathan Sachs, and I think it's very cogent and kind of says what I'm trying to say, I think much more eloquently. Jews must fight anti-Semitism, but never internalize it. Again, anti-Semitism exists, we have to identify it, but we should never internalize it. It is easier said than done. He's right, this is a struggle. If you are hated, it is natural to believe you are hateful, that the defect lies in you. It really does. It rarely does. Hate exists in the mind of the hater, not in the person of the hated. Jews have fault, and Judaism is a religion of self-criticism and repentance. But those faults have nothing to do with those of which they are accused by their enemies. Anti-Semitism tells us about anti-Semites, not Jews. Are Jews perfect? No. But is anti-Semitism a Jewish problem? Also, no. Emphatically no. One of the mistakes made by good, honorable, and reflective Jews was to believe that since Jews were hated because they were different, they should try as far as possible not to be different. So some converted, others assimilated. Yet others reformulated Judaism to eliminate as far as possible all that made Jews and Judaism distinctive. When these things failed, as they did, not only in 19th century Germany and Austria, but also in 15th century Spain, some internalized this failure. Thus was born the tortured psychology known as Jewish self-hatred. There are extreme examples of this, of mass conversion and mass complete assimilation. There's actually another quote for Jonathan Sachs. He once said, non-Jews are ashamed of Jews who are ashamed of their Judaism, but they're proud of Jews who are proud of their Judaism. And I'll tell you a story. There's a rabbi, he used to live in Vancouver. I think now he lives in Los Angeles. His name was Marvin Heyer. He used to live in British Columbia, in Vancouver. And at some point, I believe in the 70s, the Queen Elizabeth and her husband, Philip, right? Prince Philip, they were coming to Victoria, to British Columbia, and they were coming to visit. So this Heyer was, he wasn't invited because you don't get invited, because if you're invited, you have to come. They basically intimated, if we invite you, will you come? And I said, yes, but I'm Jewish, I'm kosher. And the advance team for the Queen said, no worries, you'll get your own meal, your own dishes, and we'll take care of it. So Rabbi Heyer and his wife, Marvin and his wife, they're very excited to get to go to this big fancy schmancy dinner with all sorts of dignitaries and big shots and meet, hopefully they'll get a chance to talk to the Queen and the Prince. So they get to this meal, they sit down, it's in a beautiful banquet hall, right? And everyone has, there's beautiful china, like a normal state dinner. And for the rabbi and his rebbetzin, there was special cutlery with a special prepackaged Jewish meal, right? If you've ever been to one of these functions, it's like basically give you like shrink wrapped airline food, right? And you sit and you eat. So they're sitting, but it's a great time. It's a beautiful place. Everyone's looking fancy schmancy. It's the who's of British Columbia. Great time. Let's do it. And they're pleased that they have the kosher food with the kosher dishes. But much to their chagrin, I hope I pronounced that right, chagrin, thank you. After the first course, I don't know, whatever they do in fancy British dinners, after the first course, the Queen has the brilliant idea that at some of these events, what she likes to do is to encourage everyone to stand up between courses and switch seats. So this way we'll all get to meet each other and we'll all get to, be everyone will get to shmooze, exactly. So the rabbi and there's everyone, there's a sinking pit in their stomach. What are we gonna do now? So the two of them decided they packed up the plates and the forks, and between each meal, after each course, they stood up and they collected the forks, the knives, their cups, their plates, and everything. They stand up and they schlep it with them to the next seat. And as you can imagine, this causes a tumult, the clinking of the dinnerware, and it's causing a scene. So there was one other Jew there who was not affiliated, so to speak, and he comes running over to the rabbi, seething between gritted teeth. He says, "You're making a chillul Hashem. You're embarrassing everybody. You have to stick in everyone's thumb. Your Jewishness. What are you doing? Sugar hair. You're embarrassing everybody." But he wasn't perturbed. He was doing what he was doing. Right? And eventually, the Prince Philip, he notices these dudes, this rabbi and this rebbetzin. I mean, he wasn't a young man. He was like a proper gentleman, walking around with the plates and the forks out of everybody. What could possibly be going on? So he was intrigued. Apparently, he's a very curious person. That's actually what I've read about Prince Philip.
Yes.
Did
And
he,
he's very-
did he pass?
Yeah, he did.
Yes, he did just
Yeah.
this
So
year.
apparently he was a very curious
And he
person.
was also, he used to say something appropriate.
Oh, yeah, it was a,
Yeah.
it was an interesting man. So he was very curious. So he walked over, like, what could possibly be the reason for this? So the Rebbetzin, Rabbi Heyer, his wife, and the prince, they get into a whole discussion about Judaism, about kosher, what it means to be kosher, and why they're doing this whole thing. And the prince was actually very intrigued. So he had an extended conversation. And he was so intrigued that he calls over his wife, the queen, to come meet these kosher people, and we'll talk about kosher and Judaism, what it's all about. And they had a very nice conversation with the prince, with the queen. And when that other Jew sees that Rabbi Har is having this conversation, he comes running over and he says, he says to Prince Philip, actually, I'm Jewish too. So Prince Philip looks at him. He looks at him with contempt. If you're Jewish, where are your dishes? Right?
Right.
Yeah. All right. Right.
The biggest problem we face as a people
Respect.
is when we're embarrassed of who we are, and we try to, and we unfortunately, which is kind of, a lot of people do this. I don't think it's their fault. They internalize anti-Semitism, and they think, what's going to answer the question? If those Jews would stop, wearing the yarmulkes in the street. And I'll tell you the truth. Personally, I'm an introverted person, right? And you might think Chabad with the Medeis, all that stuff. But I also have a very hard time with this. Let's say yesterday at the marathon, like you guys were talking about yesterday by the marathon, my brother and I, we had the opportunity to help run a minyan, where Jews from around the world came to put on tefillin and pray before they ran, because they wouldn't be able to otherwise. And one of the things the Lubavitcher have encouraged was that when you should try to approach as many Jews as possible and ask them to put on tefillin, to light Shabbos candles, whatever it is. So now I feel uncomfortable going up to a random person and asking them if they want to put on tefillin. And sometimes I feel like, what am I doing? Sticking my face out, walking down the street. But this is really what we got to do. We got to show the world that we're loud and proud and we're here to stay. And that's what there were many people who thanked me afterwards, after we brought them into the tent and put on tefillin, that's exactly what they needed before they started their race. In a couple of weeks' time, it's going to be Hanukkah. A very basic thing that Chabad kind of revolutionized in American Jewry is the outward display of Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the height of the holiday season usually. And any American, you walk down the street, what do you see? You see the trees, you see the lights. What Chabad started doing was also have a menorah there, have menorah lightings in public spaces. The biggest pushback Chabad faced in the 70s, with the beginning of the menorah, the outdoor public menorah lighting campaigns, was from other Jews. JCCs in places like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia actually sued the Jews, the Chabad, the local Chabad, and tried to prevent them from having a menorah in the public sphere. And actually made it all the way to the Supreme Court. Chabad ended up winning. I believe Dershowitz was the one who argued for Chabad in front of the Supreme Court. But whatever. The point is, now is actually the season where we have to show the Jewish pride as much as possible. A couple of weeks' time, we're going to be at the mall and we're going to have a menorah lighting. There's going to be 300-400 people like we have every single year. And that is the answer to anti-Semitism. Another story about how we have to fight, internalizing anti-Semitism. There was a man, Rabbi Dr. Abraham Tursky, who was an expert. He was a psychologist. He was an expert in addiction and recovery. He ran a recovery center in Pittsburgh. He was also a Hasidic Jew. So he used to walk around with the Hasidic hat, with the long frock, and he had a big, long white beard. And he tells a story about how once he was traveling, I don't remember if it was by bus or by plane, and he was a Hasidic Jew, even though he was a psychiatrist, the hat, the beard, the long black frock. And when he gets on the bus, he's accosted by a secular Jew, and he says, "What's your problem? I think it's shameful that your appearance is so different. This is America. There's no need to be so conspicuous and so different from everybody else." And Dr. Twersky looks at the guy in bewilderment and said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm Amish. This is how we dress. This is how we dress. These are our traditions. And this is how we do." And the guy immediately becomes apologetic. "Oh, terribly sorry, sir. I didn't mean to offend you. I think it's wonderful that you're upholding and maintaining your traditions." Do Jews belong here in America? Do Jews have a right to live here freely in America, in Canada, in the UK?
We're the basis of Christianity. We were
So
here.
if we have a
as
right to live
George
here,
Washington.
if we have a right to live here in America, then we have a right to live in America publicly and proudly.
Yeah.
We do not have to hide who we are or change who we are. We wouldn't ask any other minority to change who they are in public. The same has to be true of Judaism, right? We live in a progressive society, correct? Of inclusivity, of diversity. Why are we hiding the fact that we're diverse, that there is something different about us? I don't think that's shameful. I think that's actually, I think that's very important.
I think one of these things here said it right. One of the,
Mhm.
it's jealousy. It's envy and
Yes.
jealousy.
That's
That's the
the
root of it.
that's the ditch. That's the ditch idea,
Yeah.
right? That when you see people who are living with a purpose, even if
Yeah.
somebody is not necessarily living the observant Jewish life, right?
Mhm.
Let's say this person is not necessarily, I don't know, doesn't have a mezuzah on every door. First of all, you think the anti-Semite cares? Did Hitler check to see if somebody came to daven mincha, the afternoon services, with a minion? No,
Mhm.
that did not bother them.
Mhm.
A Jew is a testament, is a witness to the idea of living life with purpose. That is who we are. That is the definition.
Can I ask you about the
Sure.
purpose business? You could say Haman didn't have a purpose. He did. He wanted to be worshipped. That was his purpose.
He was
Mordecai would not worship.
He was
him.
trying to fulfill that purpose by coming up with this ridiculous, I want to be perfect.
Yeah, but he had a purpose.
But he was trying to fill that hole with this purpose, right?
He wanted to be worshipped. Okay. I mean, I think these people who want to be,
Right.
Great,
Mhm.
have a purpose. But the Jews are getting
But it's a misguided purpose, right?
Yes.
It's a misguided purpose. That's not why we were created, right?
It's
We were
power.
created.
They want power.
Yeah, we were created to make this world a better place.
Right.
Every
They
human
don't
being.
need a
That's not
purpose.
That's not a Jewish thing. Every human being.
And I was
Yeah.
saying Sophia before we came in. We were talking about anti-Semitism. I said Mohammed got pissed off at the Jews when they didn't. First he liked them, they helped him, whatever. But when they did not follow his, laws, he got mad and hated
Yeah.
them. Martin Luther, the same thing.
Yeah.
They
Actually, I want to show you a quote from Luther that actually made me laugh.
The Dreyfus.
The
You're gonna have to speak.
Dreyfus
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was accused because he had his appearance was too.
Was that true, Dreyfus? Because he was a soldier.
Maybe that was
He was a
That's
soldier.
somebody else.
He
No,
was a soldier.
Dreyfus was accused because there was
Well, I tell you, I
anti-Semitism in
find-
France, and they
What
put
I
him in
see
jail for 10 years.
lately over this whole pandemic.
Yeah, we're gonna have to speak up so everyone at
I
home.
say over this pandemic thing, something, it might be very subtle, but through the North Shore, you saw the Hasidic families and the obvious Jewish families, the Yom stuff, doing things they've always done where other families have been afraid to go out. You
Mhm.
see, the supermarket was busy, things were busy, you were going to shul,
Mhm.
and people, there was a slight bit of enviousness there.
Okay,
To
that's an interesting
in
point.
the community that I see and the people
That's
I
an
talk
interesting
to,
point.
that and you see it. You're walking with your children. People, I
Right.
mean, other people are afraid
Yeah.
to go out, and that wasn't. And initially, they were saying, "Oh, it's spreading in the Orthodox community," and that's kind of dissipated. Yet they went to school the whole time.
Right.
Now that those children are back in school, you see what the children miss
Yeah,
over the last
100%.
year or so.
That's a bit of a different point, but yeah, I hear you.
But it's just slight
Yeah.
thing, a slight shading.
I want to read another quote from. This is from a gentleman by the name of Cecil Roth, who's a British historian, and he worked first at Oxford and then at Bar Ilan. And here's what he had to say about. He calls it a symbol against uniformity. In this fact, perhaps lays the greatest. Page 67. I'm sorry. This fact perhaps lays the greatest service of the medieval Jew to mankind. It was a period when authority was triumphant in the intellectual sphere, when thought was circumscribed even more than practice, when uniformity was established itself not as an accident, but as a principle throughout European life. Had this state of affairs continued unchallenged, progress, scientific as well as philosophical, would have been impossible. The mere fact that the Jew existed, that he preserved the habit of independent thought, helped to save the world from this menace. It was impossible, even for the least original mind, to fail to realize that in the Jewish quarter, there existed a class as intelligent, at least as other men were, who yet did not believe as other men, who possessed literature and beliefs and practices, which were not like those of the rest of the world, and refused to pay even lip service to the prevailing ideas. This very fact saved the world from accepting uniformity, finally, as a natural thing. It stimulated students and thinkers to realize the existence of other spheres to conquer over and above those which were delineated from the pulpit. And if from time to time Europe shook off its lethargy and began to re-examine for itself the wells of human thought, the propinquity
No,
propinquity
Oh,
of the Jew was in part responsible. So what he's saying here, is that the idea of being different is in itself inherently a good thing.
That's what I mentioned.
But there's one last point I want to actually end the class off with, if I may. Another idea from the Rebbe. Another idea from the Lubavitch Rebbe. Back to the story of Esther and Achashverosh and Haman. Esther, eventually, towards the end of the Purim story, she reveals to her husband that she was Jewish. But what was her response? How did she convince Achashverosh not to kill all the Jews?
You love me, don't you?
Well, so that should save just her. Why save everyone else?
because I'm a product of these people.
That's exactly the point.
Yeah.
She didn't have to go and explain that these people are actually not all the calumnies, as I think it was Josephus said about the Jews. He said, "You love me, and you respect me, and like the Megillah says, Matzachein, I have found favor in your eyes. It's because I am a Jew. It's because I'm a product of these people. And don't listen to what Haman and everyone else had to say. Just the fact that he was familiar with who Esther was and the qualities that she had and who she represented, that itself was enough to convince Achashverosh that the Jews were not the nuisance that he thought they were."
The second exhibit was Mordecai.
Yeah, right. He saved, and he revealed that Mordecai saved your life, right?
And Mordecai too.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was honest.
The best way to fight anti-Semitism, we're not going to destroy anti-Semitism in our lifetimes. It's not going to happen. But the best way for us to combat anti-Semitism is to show our neighbors, our colleagues, our coworkers, our friends, our extended families that a Jew is a mensch is a Jew. And part of the reason I'm a mensch is because I'm a Jew. So when you wear a yarmulke, let's say if you wouldn't normally wear a yarmulke, or you wear a Magen David necklace, you have a mezuzah on your door, and your neighbors know that you're a Jew. Your neighbors know you're a mensch, right?
Mhm.
Your neighbors know that you're a good person. Right? There's actually a joke. They say, "What's the difference between an anti-Semite and a Jew?" You ask anti-Semites what he thinks about Jews. You said, "Jews, scum of the earth. They're a bunch of liars, cheats, and thieves." What about your neighbor Goldberg? Oh, Goldberg, he's a great guy. Him you could trust. He would never hurt a fly. Goldberg I love. The rest of the Jews, I hate their guts. You ask a Jew what he thinks about the Jews. Oh my God, the Jews, I love them.
But you can't do it
They're
for
the
your
gods.
neighbor.
The Jews, we love the Jews. We love them so much. They're the best.
Yeah.
The God's chosen people. They're so kind and loving. What about your neighbor Levine? Levine, that guy, what a schmuck. He's a ghana, he's a thief. You can't trust him, right? So if we show the anti-Semites that your neighbor Goldberg who's Jewish, he's a mensch, right? That you show them that no, we're not all these pernicious lies they say about anti-Semites. A Jew is a mensch is a Jew. We're not going to change the world,
Yeah, that's
but
an
you could
awful-
change your
like my mother
community.
said, that's an awful heavy cross to bear.
Okay,
I mean, you're not.
that's kind of what it's kind of comes. You know what I'm saying? There's a story. You can read the story yourselves. On Tech 72, there was a Fatah operative, a Palestinian Arab. He was a Fatah Arab operative, one of the terrorist organizations in Israel, and he ended up actually becoming a professor in the Quds University, and he actually led a trip of Palestinian students to Auschwitz to show them the experience of anti-Semitism. The first of its kind. He actually was fired also because of this trip. And he said once in an interview, what triggered this change? Why did he go from being a Fatah operative whose mission is to destroy the state of Israel to wanting to promote inclusivity and equality? He said, well, his father had to go to Hadassah Hospital for chemotherapy. And when I brought him there, to my shock, he saw that the doctors and the nurses treated him as a patient. These Jewish doctors, even though they treated him like a mensch. And they were friendly and patient. And he saw that they're mensch. So this idea that I have, that they're humans, just like I'm a human, and they have the same desires, the same fears, the same wants that I have. That itself is enough to convince even an avowed anti-Semite that, you know what, maybe we should give him a second thought. Again, we're not here to solve all anti-Semitism of the world, but I think we can make a difference just by living a proud life as a Jew.
And on page 39, the Rabbi Yaakov Emden said that people trying to uproot and destroy us, their hatred caused by envy has led them to trouble us greatly.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the core. That's the root.
Yeah. We're just going to finish with one more story. One final story about how one Jew taught a non-Jew about how he was created for a purpose, which is honestly the point of Judaism, right?
Mm-hmm.
The founder of the Chabad movement, his name was Rabbi Shneur Zalman Eliadi. His portrait's actually up there on the wall. So he was imprisoned in 1798 in St. Petersburg on trumped up charges. And during the course of his imprisonment, one of the officers, one of the Russian ministers, who actually was well versed in Bible studies, had heard about that there's a Rebbe, a Jewish scholar in town, in the prison, I'm sorry, and he went and visited him in his cell. So he asked the Alter Rebbe, this Russian minister was not Jewish, he asked the Alter Rebbe to explain, it says in Genesis, the story of the Garden of Eden, and God called out to man, to Adam, capital M, man, and he said, where are you? Ayaka in Hebrew, where are you? It says, God, of course, knew where Adam was. So what's he saying? So at first, Rabbi Shneur Zalman presented the explanation that's given by Rashi, that God was just saying, Ayeka, where are you? Was just a conversation starter, so to speak, right? He didn't want to freak Adam out. He has to talk to Adam. So first, ask him how he's doing, how are things going, Ayeka, right? It's like we didn't speak to somebody for 3 years and they start small talking, they're trying to get to another point, right? So the Russian minister says to the Alter Rebbe, I know what Rashi says. This non-Jew studied the Chumash so well. He knew what Rashi says. Tell me what it really means. I want to understand how the Rebbe understands the verse. So the Rebbe replied, and he said, when you say Ayeka, where are you? Is God's eternal call to every man with a capital M. Where are you holding? What have you accomplished? What have you been doing? You're allotted a certain amount of days and years and minutes to fulfill your mission in life. You have lived so many and so many years, so many days and so many years. And the Alter Rebbe actually said exactly how old this minister was. Where are you, Ayeka? What have you accomplished? Where are you holding? And this is really what we're trying to teach the world. That everyone has to ask themselves once in a while, Ayeka, what are you holding? Where are you holding? What have you accomplished? What are you up to? And the minister was very impressed. He clapped Alter Rebbe on the back. He said, bravo. And eventually he was instrumental in getting him released from prison. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we have to understand that anti-Semitism is inherently absurd. When we try to explain the different origins or explanations or reasons for anti-Semitism, there are many valid reasons as long as we understand where it's oriented towards. There are certain answers which are valid, and there are many, and certain answers which are inherently invalid. If we're looking towards Judaism, trying to understand what's wrong with Judaism, then we're just victim blaming. Then we're just internalizing hatred from outside. And I think we as a society have come to the realization that you do not victim blame. I think that's something almost everybody accepts.
Mhm.
It's a term of gaslighting, right? Not to get too extreme, but in many abusive relationships, it's the abuser kind of says, you made me do this. If only you would stop, if only you wouldn't force me to do this to you, right?
Mhm.
That's the way, I'm not a psychologist or a social worker, but from my knowledge and
Well,
experience,
take it to the nth degree, the ridiculous logistical end. There would be no anti-Semitism if no Jews were existing.
yeah,
So what, are we supposed to stop being Jews?
first of all that, and also, one of the most anti-Semitic, by polling, by data, one of the most anti-Semitic countries in the world is Indonesia.
And there's no
A
Jews
Jew has
there.
never lived in Indonesia.
Well,
No, really, statistically, it wasn't Pew, it was one of the global guys, maybe Gallup,
Mhm.
one of the big data harvesting people. I don't know who it was.
Biggest Muslim country in the world.
Okay, but they never met a Jew. Why is there anti-Semitism in China and Japan?
Why is it not? in
There
China?
is, but
There
it's a handful of
Oh,
Jews,
yes.
right? You could say because the communist ideology, some of it trickled down from the Russian anti-Semitism, Russian communism, Chinese communism, maybe. But the point is it's inherently absurd, and it's inherently ridiculous. And the different explanations we could give are varied. But we have to make sure it's oriented towards understanding that the problem lays in the hater, not the hated.
Okay.
And the last thing we should be doing is trying to alter who we are and alter what makes us Jewish, because that is not the answer. And with that thought, I think we should all take a minute maybe, or a couple of seconds to think about how we can actually show the world that we're proud to be Jewish and we're proud of our heritage. And when Hanukkah's coming up, Hanukkah's the,
Put a candle, I mean, a menorah.
yeah, whatever you want.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to end the recording, but I'm not going anywhere. If anyone wants to hang around for comments, questions, please feel free.